you've covered in your work over, really since the 70s, the entire digital revolution, and that is an area that at Signal we spend a lot of time talking and thinking about. Um, and you've always been on the vanguard. In the past year, really 6 months, the technology industry has adopted a new term, which is really an old term. You and I met back in the days of Wired.
Yeah.
And back then, the idea of the metaverse was something that I was quite familiar with because I read a lot of science fiction. Many
Right.
of our authors at Wired were science fiction authors, including the creator of that term, Neil Stephenson. Metaverse has now been adopted by the CEOs of Facebook and Microsoft as the next big thing in computing. Um, this world of blended digital and physical realities. How do you react to the ideas of the metaverse, which is now quite the buzzword in the technology industry?
Well, I react like a sociologist to it, which is to ask the question, why now when the climate crisis is coming to really public consciousness in a way that reveals its obscenity. I mean, that reveals its cruelty and our negligence. Um, is this really the moment when the technology industry wants to declare, and why, that the thing to focus on is a world where you can escape from that into a kind of hybrid zone where you can be surrounded by the world and the environment you're not really living in? I mean, you could write a treatise on why it makes sense that they would do that, but I also think it has its dangers and it has its poignancy, and I think it's a direction that needs to be challenged, because you could
Yeah.
argue this is the moment when the people who are best at bringing us together when we're alone should focus on how to use that capacity to build real community, physical community, to organize our reinvigoration of our physical planet and saving our physical. And instead to say, well, now we're, the hot thing is rockets to touch space with some sense that we'll be space tourists. Space tourists, as the planet implodes, is that, I mean, there's something about the combination of the metaverse and space tourism at the same time that that the most richest and most brilliant minds in technology should be looking at. I mean, is it an abandonment of 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 Earth, of the reality of our physical environment, of our day to day? There's some. It just feels to me that I'm not altogether on board. I'm just not
Right.
altogether on. It reminds me of Google. When Google Glass first came out many years ago, I interviewed, I think I interviewed 50 or 60 people who used them, kind of, early adopters. And they talked about it as a way to end racism, because you could put yourself in the perspective of a Black person, a person of color, and you could sort of see the world through their eyes. You could see people crossing the street to avoid you. You could sort of project yourself into the um, into the experience of someone very different than you, and that was well and good. But there was no politics, there was no activism, there was no community organizing, there was no engagement with the systemic racism. Uh, it was kind of like it was something you did, and then you put away.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Right.
I don't think that I think that we have problems that technology can, wants to help us escape to make our lives seem more friction free, but that we need to address.
Yeah.
So,
I love the fact that you raised the I don't even know if this is the right term, but the solution of community.
yes,
And because some of the earliest excitement in the technology industry was how you could build community,
yes,
and how new relationships formed so effortlessly, and important relationships formed. But at some point, we seem to have lost part of that. And so your
yes,
call to back to community, back to empathy, certainly rings true with me. So, Sherry Turkle, thank you so much for joining us for this Signal conversation. I look forward to continuing to read your work and converse with you.
thank you. My pleasure.